Ajri. I'm Associate Professor at King Saud University, and I want to welcome you at our session of the product space and within hydrocarbon diversification potential. One of the main obstacles facing the GCC countries was reducing their dependency on oil for their development, and even that the GCC countries have asserted that they will reduce it since the 70s, but they failed. However, during the last maybe 6-7 years, we have a new visions, and they are really trying to implement the diversification. And one of the way the GCC countries can really succeed in doing is just through the carbon and petrochemical industries, because they have a comparative advantage in these industries, so they can diversify from just natural gas and oil to improve and develop these petrochemical industries. We have today so many distinguished speakers to talk about the subject. The first speaker is Ricardo Hassman. He is a PhD economics from Cornell University. Ricardo is the founder and the director of Harvard's Growth Lab and the Rafiq Al-Hariri Professor of the Practice of International Political Economy at Harvard Kennedy School. He served as, in fact, his distinguished research that I cannot talk about, and I don't have the time. We don't have the time to talk about. What he served as principal investigator for more than 50 research initiatives in nearly 30 countries. He has served as a Minister of Planning of Venezuela and as a member of the board of Central Bank of Venezuela. He also served as a chair of the IMF World Bank Development Committee. We welcome him to start our session today.
Professor Hausman, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am ready.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman has made the introduction. I think maybe you weren't tuned in at the time, but the introduction has been made and we're all set and ready to listen to you.
Yeah, very good. Well, first of all, let me thank you for this kind invitation. Let me say hello to my good old friend Ibrahim El Badawi for having thought of me for this session. The request forced me to think hard about the issue you asked me about, and so this is where I'm at. So I'm very much looking forward to the comments that you'll have to make. So the question is, the GCC has a lot of oil, and oil can be used to make many things. So should it focus its diversification strategy on adding value to its hydrocarbons, petrochemicals? Petrochemicals go into many things, including solar panels, wind blades, etc., etc. So how should we think about the industry going forward? Or are there alternative ways of thinking about how diversification from oil might take place? So I was thinking, okay, I'm very good at oil. How should I think of diversification? So I'm going to illustrate this issue with a completely different case. Let's say I'm thinking of Finland. And Finland is a country that has a lot of trees. So you would say, how should Finland develop? Well, what can you do with trees? Obviously, you can make wood panels, and you might say, yes, but that's not that sexy. So let's think more. So, well, maybe with wood panels, I can make furniture, and so that's more value added, etc. And then maybe with wood panels, I can make paper. And that's definitely sort of like one way of thinking of diversification. How can I add value to this raw material? And if I look at the export basket of Finland, I will find paper, wood, etc., and these kinds of things. They do a lot of other stuff, but they at least sort of like a little bit, this logic is there. But I would like to argue that there is a different diversification logic. And the diversification logic says, well, Finland is a country with a lot of trees. Because they have a lot of trees, they need tools and machines that cut wood, right? So they become good at tools and machines that cut wood. And so here, there's machines that cut wood. You might say, well, I can move from machines that cut wood to machines that cut other things, because not everything in the world is made out of wood. And from machines that cut wood and other things, I might go to automated machines that cut. And from automated machines that cut, I might just move to plain automated machines. They don't need to cut. There's more to life than just cutting, right? So, and from automated machines, they ended up in Nokia. So the idea is that this is a path of diversification. It all started because you have a lot of trees. But what's happening in this path of diversification is not that you are adding value to your raw materials and you're looking downstream to see what happens with your product. Is that in the process of processing whatever raw material you have, something is happening to your capabilities. And then you ask yourself, given the capabilities that I have, which capabilities that if I added to my current set of capabilities would open up new universes, new galaxies, new places in which I could move. Okay, so the top line is adding value to my raw materials. The bottom line is adding capabilities to my capabilities. And interestingly enough, Finland got all the way to Nokia, but they couldn't move from cell phones to smartphones. And that's why Nokia didn't make it. But so it's just to get a sense of these two different forms of diversification that I'm going to elaborate on. So let me compare this adding value to your raw materials versus adding capabilities to your capabilities. Adding value to raw materials is what all production is about. All production, you start with something, you do something, and supposedly you end up with something that is worth more. You added value to something that was pre-existing. But why should you add value to your own raw materials, to the raw materials that you happen to have in place? Well, that's only going to confer an advantage to you if transport costs are somewhat significant. So, because having your raw material means that you don't have to pay to bring the material into the country. But for any other competitor of yours, the raw material is only as far as the nearest port. So from a purely locational point of view, it doesn't confer that much advantage unless you can argue that the capabilities that are required at this stage of the game somehow would have some use downstream. But that's a question that we can explore. So a set of conditions must be present for adding value to your raw materials to give you a significant advantage vis-a-vis other producers. The first one is that the raw material must be hard to transport, especially vis-a-vis the final product. So it's very hard to transport a tree it's much easier to transport, consolidated wood panels. So it makes sense to process the wood, the trees near the forest, right? Because transporting the raw material is very expensive. But transporting oil is exquisitely cheap. It's amazingly cheap to transport oil. So you don't really, having oil locally available doesn't give you any particular advantage. The story is different with natural gas. Having natural gas available, and as we know, it's a joint product with oil. In most oil fields, have associated gas. So having a locally available natural gas can confer you a significant advantage, because if you were to move natural gas, you would have to develop a pipeline, and that's expensive. And if you want to move it even further, you have to transform it into LNG, and LNG is super expensive. You waste about 40% of the energy in natural gas liquefying it. So natural gas is a different story. But the cost of transporting, say, raw diamonds is insignificant vis-a-vis the cost of the diamond. So it doesn't confer to you any advantage. The other thing that must be the case is that the downstream activity uses your raw material or your input in a very, very significant way. So, for example, something like 90% of the cost of gasoline is the cost of the crude oil. So you would say, well, gasoline, it makes, oil is very cheap to transport. So typically refineries are closer to points of consumption than to points of production. And international trade happens with crude, not with products, mostly. So, but for gasoline, the second condition is abided for, but not so for, say, for lithium-ion batteries, because in lithium-ion batteries, you really need a lot of materials. You need the lithium, but that's only like 10% of the materials. You need cobalt, you need nickel, you need a lot of other stuff. So you might have one of them, you still have to bring in all the others. And by the way, it's not true for chocolate, because for chocolate you need cocoa, but you also need other things. You need milk, or you need sugar, you need other things. So it really pains people in Ghana that they export cocoa, and that Switzerland and Belgium export chocolate. So having the raw material may not provide you with that much advantage. Now, I would like to now move on to how I view the world and how I think about these adjacencies, and especially how I think about what does it mean to add capabilities to your capabilities. How it is that you can leverage the fact that you have accumulated capabilities in the oil industry because you have a lot of oil, and maybe because you have a lot of petrochemicals. How can you leverage those capabilities into other things? So I have applied this framework to a narrow set of things. We could apply this framework more broadly. I have not applied it to petrochemicals, which I now regret. But in any case, you'll see how the methods I'm going to use and the analysis I'm going to do can be leveraged to analyze adjacencies in other dimensions. So, there is a way of thinking about the world. This is sort of like the neoclassical production function. It says that, there's some things that you might want to call output or the product. There is a black box, which is a production function. This black box, and this black box has technology in it, call it A. It has physical capital, it has labor, it has human capital. So these are the ingredients of the production function. And I'm going to say, we all in economics, we've been taught this, we understand it. It's the way people think about this issue. It's just not the way I like to think about the world. Okay, so I think this is a very Greek way of thinking about the world, in the sense that I think that this is a way of thinking about the world as if it was made out of these essential substances, earth, water, wind, and fire, and that this is what the world is made out of: labor, capital, etc. I'm going to assume that this is not what the world is made out of, that that the world instead is made out of atoms, if you want. And here are the atoms in the periodic table. And these atoms, are going to combine in interesting ways, making molecules. And sort of like behind this periodic table are the foundations of chemistry. Things that are in a column share chemical properties. And so the world is going to be made out of these letters, if you want, okay? So I'll explain why I think of the world this way. I think that to understand the world, we need to understand what technology is. And in my mind, technology is productive knowledge, is the knowledge that we use to transform the world. But this productive knowledge takes three forms. It takes the form of embodied knowledge in tools. So we sort of like, to do something, we need to do a machine that does the something. So we embody the knowledge of making the machine in the machine. So the people who use the machine don't need to know how to make the machine. So we embody technology in things. So that's one thing that productive knowledge is. And it's captured in some sense in that production function as capital, if you want, but it's really the knowledge that I want to emphasize. Then there's codified knowledge in recipes, formulas, algorithms, how to do manuals. And here, that knowledge is captured in some symbolic space, in some conceptual space. Here, it's captured in ink over paper, but it's not in the ink and it's not in the paper, it's in the symbols. So that if you take a picture, as the person here took the picture of this thing, it doesn't change the meaning, because the meaning is not in the ink and it's not in the paper. It's in some symbolic space, in some conceptual space. And we call that codified knowledge. And then this is not the end of the story, because if your tooth hurts, you don't ask your significant other to, go and download an article from the web and follow the instructions, right? You actually go to a dentist, and the dentist knows, the dentist has tools. The dentist has been explained the protocols, but the dentist mixes the tools and the protocols with something you and I don't have, which is the ability to look into the mouth and see things we wouldn't have seen, and the ability to use the tools in ways that we would not have known. And that third thing is what we call know-how, okay? It's tacit knowledge in brains. And that knowledge exists in brains and only in brains. Now, tools can be shipped around more or less easily, and codes can be shared. But know-how is very hard to embed in a brain. Here you have Rafa Nadal, and Rafa Nadal knows how to play tennis, but it's not that he has information about playing tennis. And you can show that by the fact that if I allow you to have a long conversation with Rafa Nadal, I doubt that your tennis abilities are going to improve much. It's not that he's going to share with you some information. That playing tennis involves some wiring of the brain and some development of muscle memory and muscular capability and stuff. It is a knowledge that is embedded in the person. And it's very hard to move that knowledge from person to person. Now, the problem is that the knowledge that we need is not to operate technology in the world, is not the knowledge that an individual can have. It's a knowledge that has to be distributed in a group of people who are cooperating in the process of implementing technology. So it would not be right to say that this lady here knows how to operate that technology, because in order to operate that technology, you need all these other people who know things that she might not know. You need air traffic controllers, you need mechanics, you need people who know about security and so on, because the process of making things involves coordinating all that distributed knowledge in the process of implementing that technology. Now we can ask ourselves the question, how many people do you need to implement technologies? And here I show you pictures of the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. And you can imagine that these are family businesses, that the knowledge necessary to make these things kind of fits in the family. But if you want to play a symphony, you need many more people who know about different things, because the timpani is different from the viola, which is different from the French horn, which is different from the harp, which is different from the string sections. So you need all of them to come together, all of these skills to come together to make a product. And you can exemplify this, in the case of this airplane, the 787 Dreamliner, which is made across all of these geographies that are described at the top, across all of these companies, because the knowledge necessary to make an engine is different from the knowledge necessary to make the landing gear, which is different from the knowledge to make the avionics or the toilets or the windows or the doors, etc. So I'm going to capture all of this idea with the sense that this know-how that is needed, it really is like these atoms of knowledge that are required, and I'm going to call them capabilities, and I'm going to assign to them some letters, just as in the periodic table. And then places are going to have subsets of those letters. Imagine those letters is all the kinds of knowledge that exist in the world, and places are going to be subsets of that knowledge. And then products are going to be made by combining these productive possibilities, by combining these letters. And so we will observe, say, that relationship, a relationship between the letters and the products. So I can describe the world as being characterized by some kind of an endowment matrix, which places have which letters, some kind of a technology matrix, which letters are required to make which products. And out of this interaction, it determines which places are able to make which products. Now, in this description, it's a very, very rich description. I can realize, why each place is able to make which product. So, for example, I can see that if I look at the graph at the left, I can see that the country at the bottom has very few letters, and as a consequence, it actually makes only one product. And the product that it makes is hat, and hat is a product that has only 3 letters, right? The country at the top has a lot of letters, and as a consequence, it's able to make all 5 products. It has enough letters to make all of them. The country in the middle is able to make only 3 products. So I can infer that the country at the top must have more letters because it makes all products. And the country at the bottom has fewer letters, it makes fewer products. I can say the same thing on the right-hand side, or a similar thing. Hat is a very short word, it only has 3 letters, and as a consequence, it's very easy to make. And as a consequence, you see that all 3 countries make hat. So hat is we would call it ubiquitous product. It's made in many places. Chair and match are sort of like intermediate products. It's made by 2 countries, right? But the products at the top, pharmaceutics and cell phone, we cheated a little bit in the spelling, are made only by the country at the top. So they're made only by 1 country. So I can infer from the number of countries that make a product, that is, from the ubiquity of the product, I can infer something about how hard it is to make it. Okay. So products at the top are long words. They use many letters, and they're consequently only going to be feasible in countries that have many letters, and countries that have many letters are highly diversified. Okay, so that I was able to tell from the graph at the left. On the graph at the right, I have erased information about the letters. So I don't know what letters places have, and I don't know what letters countries products need. But I can still see that the bottom one only makes one product, that the top one makes all 5 products, that the product at the bottom is made by all countries, that the products at the top is only made by one country. So I can infer something about the space of letters, even if I cannot observe the letters, okay? So we call the approach at the right, we call it the phenotypic approach. You have no access to the genes, you have just access to the way things look, the phenotypes. But the approach at the left, you see the letters, so you realize, what letters you have, what letters the country at the bottom has, and it doesn't have that are needed to make match, probably an M and a T, right? Or an M and a C, sorry. So you can see if you wanted to diversify which letters are missing. So obviously it's great if you can do things genotypically, but we've done a lot of things just phenotypically, and I'll show you how. But for the purpose of this lecture, I'm also going to develop this genotypic approach. I'm going to take a stand of what these letters actually are, and then I'm going to see, making this description, what things are close to oil or oil refining and so on, okay? So that's where we're going. We're going to apply this framework to the question that I was asked. So what are these letters? These letters are productive capabilities. They should be somehow non-tradable, that they explain why the place is able to make something. It's able to make something because there are some things that are in place. So they're non-tradable. They include this collective know-how. So it's the team of people, you're able to assemble the team of people in place that are needed to implement that technology. So you're able to put the symphonic orchestra together in that place, right? But it includes also the non-tradable inputs. We think, in theory, we would think that the tradable inputs should be relatively easy to bring in, but the non-tradable inputs must be in place for production to take place, including the public goods that production requires, okay? So for the genotypic approach, I'm going to take a stand. I'm going to say these letters are the occupations that you have to, the people with different skills, that is the different occupations that you need to hire to put the team in place. And we're going to assume maybe that it's about mastering technologies through patents. We're going to find out that that's not very, very critical empirically, but also sort of like the input-output things that you need to be able to buy in order to produce the stuff, okay? So that's what we think these letters are. So when we look at the world looks as if place is different in the amount of letters that it has. So on the left, what you have is a matrix where every row is a country and every column is a product. And I put a 1, a dark thing, if the country produces more than an epsilon, a really small amount of that product, that it exports an epsilon of that product. That is, I define an epsilon in this case as exporting 1% of what it would have exported had it exported that product with the same intensity as the world. So it's sort of like it's just an epsilon of the product. And what you see is that the countries at the top produce everything. The countries at the bottom produce few things. The products at the left are produced by everybody. The products at the right are produced by few countries. So it has the same shape as the examples I was giving you with the hat and the cell phone, okay? I can capture that information in this table on the right, where I put on the x-axis how many products the country makes, at least more than epsilon. So it's the sum of the rows, if you want. And on the y-axis, I put how ubiquitous are on average the product that this country makes. How many other countries are also able to make this product? And remember that products with high ubiquity are things like the hat that everybody made. With low ubiquities are things like the cell phone. And what we find is this relationship that some countries have few letters and consequently they make few things, and things that everybody knows how to make, they are here at the top. And and other countries make everything and things that few other countries can make. So the world seems to have the shape of a world that differs in the letters that it has. Now, I'm going to look at growth, okay? Here on the left, I've put that all the countries that were not rich, countries that in 1980 started in the bottom 75 percentile of GDP per capita, okay? I'm going to measure their GDP relative to the GDP of the US, okay? And I'm going to ask myself, how much did they grow vis-a-vis the US, okay? I'm going to order them by quintile of growth, okay? So I'm ordering them by quintile of growth. So at the top, you have the group of countries, the quintile that grew the most. And at the bottom, you have the group of countries that grew the least, okay? And what this is telling us is that in the top quintile narrowed the gap with the US very significantly, okay? The second quintile barely improved vis-a-vis the US. And all the other three quintiles in the world fell behind. Okay, so this is just mechanically, just says, most countries in the world fell behind, okay? But what I'm going to show you on the right is what happened to the amount of letters that countries had. The amount of letters is something we try to capture with the economic complexity index. Okay, what happened to the amount of letters that countries had? And what we find is that only the country, where I'm grouping the 5 quintiles in the same way I grouped the ones on the left. So this is by quintiles of growth, okay? But you see that the countries in the top quintile are the only ones that really significantly improved their number of letters vis-a-vis the US, and the ranking follows the ranking of growth. So the growth process is really about acquiring these letters and about expressing them in more words and in longer words, okay? That the process of growth is this process of acquiring capabilities and using them to do more things and more complicated things. Now, the process of acquiring more capabilities suffers from a chicken and egg problem. That in order for you to start doing something, you have to know how to do it. But you typically don't know how to do the things you don't do. So how is it that we're going to start doing things if to do them, you have to know how to do them, but you don't know how to do the things you don't do? To make watches, you need watchmakers, but how are you going to get watchmakers in a place that doesn't make watches? And how do you become a watchmaker in a place that doesn't make watches? So this is the proverbial chicken and egg problem. And we think that the world, we have evidence that the world solves this problem by something which is going to be illustrated by this example I want to share with you. Here we have a classification problem. I want to ask you which two animals are very similar to each other and which animal is different, okay? Now you might tell me, well, I think, the lion and the zebra are from Africa and the bear is not, or you might tell me that the zebra eats grass and the lion and the bear don't eat grass. But if you apply this Scrabble theory of development, this letter theory of development, you will realize that a zebra is just a bear with an extra Z. So the distance between bear and zebra is just one letter. The distance between bear and lion is very large because with bear, you have 4 letters that you don't need to make a lion, and there are 4 letters that you don't have. So in order to go from bear to zebra, you have to solve 1 chicken and egg problem. To go from bear to lion, you have to solve 4 chicken and egg problems. That's the basic intuition, okay? What we need is to understand from all the products in the world, where are they relative to each other? Which are sort of like close to each other, like bear to zebra, and which are far away from each other, like bear to lion? And we've captured that idea in this concept of the product space. So the product space is, in some sense, a technological space which expresses the similarity between the letters that you need to make one product and the letters that you need to make another product. So here on the right in green, you have garments. These are garments. Here in brown, you have agro-processed food. Here in red, you have an economic, a construction goods cluster. Here in blue, you have a machinery cluster. The big one here is cars, and the second biggest one here is trucks. Here in red, you have chemicals, including pharmaceuticals. Here in blue, light blue, you have electronics. And you see that products differ enormously in how densely packed together they are. And this density of packing together is related to how useful is the knowledge to make one thing if you wanted to make another thing. How useful is the knowledge to make cars if you wanted to make trucks? Or how useful is the knowledge to make shirts for men if you want to make pants for men? Okay? Now, unfortunately, oil is up here. It's sort of like it's very poorly connected to other products. It's very much in the periphery of the product space. It means that if you are good at making oil, you're not necessarily good with those capabilities at making other things. It's sort of like isolated in the product space. So we can characterize products now in these two dimensions, okay? On the x-axis, on the y-axis is how long is the word, okay? The average complexity of that kind of products. How long are those words, okay? And on the x-axis, it's how close are the capabilities needed to make the product if you wanted to make other products, okay? So for example, I showed you that both garments and machinery are very connected. They're in sort of like in a very dense part of this product space, but machinery is more complex than garments. It's longer words than garments. And electronics is more complex than garments. It's a little bit less connected, okay? So, but oil is here. It's a very short word, okay? And it's not very connected. So it's not going to be the ideal spot with which to jump to other things. And here we have looked at all the distribution of how well connected are different products in the world. This is here, this line here is the world's median. This is the average of all natural resource industries, and this is oil. So oil is particularly disconnected. Petrochemicals might be a different story, but oil is particularly disconnected. So I'm going to use this framework to define 4 concepts, okay? The first concept I would define is how close are 2 products from each other, okay? So we call that the proximity. It's a concept between 2 products. Another concept we use is the concept of density. That's how close is a country to a product. Okay, so it's if a country wanted to diversify into that product, how close it is. But a country is not just one product. A country is a collection of product that it already knows how to make. So it has more letters because it has enough letters to make all the things it makes. So it's a measure of how close is a country to a product. The third one is what we call the complexity outlook index, which is how well positioned is a country relative to all products, how easy it is for that country to diversify. And the last one is how strategic it would be for that country to move into that product, because if it developed the capabilities to move into that product, it would now have an easier time to continue diversifying because it now has the letters to move to easier jumps going forward. It now can go from bear to zebra because now it has enough letters to make the bear. So these are 4 concepts that we like to use. So when we look at the proximity of products in the product space, these are the products that are closest to oil. I already told you that oil is not very well connected, so these distances are relatively large. But here I have ranked industries in terms of how close they are in the product space. in terms of this phenotypic approach, okay? So the implications of this is that the capabilities that go into producing oil are not close to many other industries. That oil is very cheap to transport, so having oil does not confer a major advantage for downstream activities. That gas is hard to transport, so local processing makes more sense. So petrochemicals, hydrogen, ammonia, basic plastics make sense to make close to that industry. But beyond that, the availability of the resource is not a significant advantage. So now let's ask, okay, but what about the capabilities that go into the oil industries? What are the alternative uses of those capabilities? What would happen if I add capabilities? So what are the paths I can think of, if you want, genotypically, in terms of adding capabilities to your capabilities? Okay, so what are those letters? So the product space uses the phenotypic approach. Okay, it presumes we cannot see the letters. It infers that two products are co-exported, that they all, when I look across all countries, that they need to be co-exported, because the countries that have what it takes to make one also have what it takes to make the other, so they share letters. It's a way to infer what's a bear and a zebra vis-a-vis a bear and a lion. But it doesn't tell us what are these letters. So I'm going to assume that I know what these letters are. I'm going to assume that these letters are either occupations or input industries that I have had to develop because I have the industry. So I'm now going to use US data to infer what these occupations are, and US data to infer what these inputs are. I'm going to assume that, if you need these occupations to make oil in the US, you probably need those occupations to make oil anywhere. And if you need these inputs to make oil in the US, you probably need these inputs to make oil anywhere, right? So I'm going to use the US input-output matrix and the US employment composition to infer something about things. And actually, I do find that I have reasons to believe that my genotypic approach makes sense. Here, what I have is I look at industries that are close to me because they have a similar set of input requirements. So they have a similar input requirement. So if I have the inputs to make oil, I must have the inputs to make that other thing also, okay? And I show that similarity in upstream inputs explains why these things collocate, why explains the product space. And when I divide these inputs between tradable inputs and non-tradable inputs, to my surprise, they both come in. It's proximity. If you produce the tradable inputs and the non-tradable inputs, it both helps you. It both explains why these things are collocated. When I look at, maybe I can move into industries because they have similar occupations as I have, right? So they're close in terms of the occupations. That seems to explain a lot, and that actually explains more than the input. So the human team that I need to put together matters. And it's not just a human team, but if I split that human team between high-skill occupations and low-skill occupations, well, high-skill occupations matter a little bit more, but actually all occupations matter quite a bit, okay? When I look at patents, I don't get that much traction, so patents don't seem to be a capability that the ability to produce patents doesn't seem to be a capability that is that critical. When I do kind of like a horse race between inputs, occupations, and patents, the bulk of the explanation is coming from occupations, but inputs add a little bit. And when I separate the inputs into tradable and non-tradable, and the occupations into high skill and low skill, I get a bit more traction from high-skill occupations. And in general, I get more traction from occupations than from inputs, and I get no traction out of patents. So I'm going to assume that what really matters, okay, so what matters is to look into which occupations I was forced to develop because I developed my oil industry, or because I developed my refining industry, or because I developed my petrochemical industry, and then look at, okay, those human capabilities or those inputs, which other industries could I use them in, okay? I also show in this graph that this sort of like explains the future, that if I want to predict whether countries diversify into a certain direction, that the product space explains a lot why countries are able to diversify. This is a measure of how countries are able to dynamically move to new industries. So a product space captures something. That when I look at this dynamics, occupations captures a lot of things. And when I look at the dynamics in terms of high skill and low skill occupations, again, both high skill and low skill occupations come in. So what are the occupations and the inputs that are required for oil and gas? I'm going to, again, use the US data. So these are the occupations that go into the US oil industry. So I'm assuming that countries in the Gulf that produce oil have all of these skills in their production set. I'm now letting you know which ones are high skilled and which ones are low skilled by changing a little bit the density of the colors. So there's a lot of management stuff. There's a lot of construction stuff. There's a lot of petroleum engineers, obviously. There's a lot of computer systems and analysts and so on. So it's a very diverse labor force. So Aramco and ADNOC are very sophisticated companies with a lot of capabilities. And these are some of the occupations that that are used in this industry. So we want to know, okay, just as Finland developed capabilities to make machines that cut wood, so what are the capabilities that then you can reutilize to cut other things, or to make automated machines that cut, and so on. So in occupation space, I can look at where is oil and oil-related activities. They're here, and I can look at which industries have similar occupations, okay? Can zoom in. And these are some of the industries that have the largest similarity in occupations. So for example, analytical laboratory instrument manufacturing seems to be related, or electric and signal testing instrument manufacturing seems to have 55% of the skills required, okay? So here you have on the left the occupations of oil, and on the right the occupations of electricity and signal testing instruments. You see that some of those occupations overlap. So here on the left, you have the occupations of the electricity and signal testing instruments. And on the right, I have recolored them to put in dark which ones are already developed because they are being hired by Aramco and ADNOC and the other oil companies in the region. So it means you already have those letters that are going into this other industry. Okay, so in the setting up of this session, I'm quoting from the questions that we were asked. It says, the global demand for petrochemicals is growing more rapidly than GDP. The industry is diversified and sophisticated and produces many consumer and manufacturing materials. Some of these materials are crucial components for energy transition, especially solar panels, wind turbine blades, thermal insulation batteries, and other electric vehicle parts. Thus, the GCC oil industry can be integrated both into the national diversification agenda and the global energy transition process. Let me comment on this problem statement. I like very much the idea that you're thinking not about how can the industry contribute to your own decarbonization, which is what a lot of the discussion is going. But how can the industry contribute to mitigation understood at the global scale? And I like that frame because I don't like too much to focus every country on reducing their own emissions. A world that wants to decarbonize is going to need a lot of things like wind turbines and solar panels and so on. So that's why I like to paraphrase John F. Kennedy to say, ask not what you can do to decarbonize your country, ask what you can do to decarbonize the world. In what way you can contribute to global decarbonization by producing the things that a decarbonizing world is going to need. So I like that frame of trying to figure out how you can contribute to that thing. However, the fact that solar panels, wind turbines, thermal insulation, batteries, and so on are made with oil derivatives does not mean that you can or should, or they can or should be made in the GCC, because on sort of like just because of geolocation, because transportation costs are unlikely to give you enough of an advantage. What you really want to know is how close are the capabilities needed to make these things to the capabilities needed to make the materials that go into these things. You know, that the fact that Switzerland doesn't have cocoa doesn't stop it from making chocolate. And other countries in the world are not going to be stopped from making turbine blades and so on just because they don't have some of the materials that go into making turbine blades. They can acquire them from others. So it's you want to know what are the capabilities that go into turbine blades, and to what extent the fact that you have those capabilities in petrochemicals, to what extent are they similar or not similar to the capabilities that go into turbine blades? How close or how far are these industries from your capabilities in capability space? Okay, so how can the capabilities used in oil or in petrochemicals be used in other fields? Okay, so you want to think of from machines that cut wood to Nokia. How can you expand your capabilities? And there, you know, you might think sideways. So, for example, Sasol in South Africa is repurposing its mastery of Fischer-Tropsch technology that they use to transform coal into liquid hydrocarbons to make sustainable aviation fuel. Okay, so it's some of the capabilities you have because of oil, then you're now going to use it into things that are maybe not necessarily related to downstream activities, but to other activities that may be using other inputs, but that are using your capability. So my punchline is, do not think of adding value to your raw materials. Think what else you can do to the capabilities that you have by mixing them with other capabilities that you may acquire, and what is the world that those capabilities might imply. So let me stop there. Thank you very much. I'm not hearing anything.
Thank you, Professor Hasman, for this interesting presentation and useful. And we hope that you can stay with us for some time for some questions from the audience, please. Now we move to our second panelist, Mr. Professor Christian Rivka. He is the program head of MS in Economics and Professor in Economics at New York University at Abu Dhabi.
We realized.
All right. Good evening. Good morning to the US. First, before I start, I would really like to thank the organizers for such a wonderful conference. It's my first ERF conference, and I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to see old friends again. I'm very happy to make very interesting conversations with new friends. It's fantastic. Shukran. Now, I also want to thank Professor Hausman, muchas gracias, for a truly inspired application of economic complexity theory to Saudi Arabia. It was very empirically grounded. It was reflecting what we know, and it is skillfully applied to the study of diversification and decarbonization in Saudi Arabia and the wider GCC. So what have we seen? Okay. There goes the effect. All right, that's good. Is there any way how I can? I tried. Oh, okay. That's the one thing. Okay. Keyboard and ticker don't work. What we have seen is a Scrabble theory of economic development. So Professor Hausman was very, very clear and very precise in helping us understand how this is the foundation of this idea of economic complexity and of the product matrix. Right? And I'm not going to read the whole quote from this wonderful book to you, but basically I highlighted a few words, and that is, countries make the products they can. And the only way societies can expand their knowledge base is by facilitating the interaction of individuals in increasingly complex webs of organizations and markets, right? So the whole idea of the product space is, it is this network map that is connecting the pairs of products that are significantly likely to be produced and exported together. And by being more connected, then the complexity, the growing complexity is becoming easier. So how do you move to a more denser part? How you, in the words of Professor Hausman, how do you accumulate more letters? Well, it involves learning by doing, right? It involves drawing extra letters from the bag and potentially getting more chicken, right? So, but what does this mean for diversification, right? First of all, the product space, it tells us, it helps us, it's some kind of map of what opportunities we have as a country. And so knowing it and using it is really helpful. And then we need to find out where we are located in that product space, so that then it tells us, it gives us some guidance of our capacity to expand. And the tricky part of the kind of the snag of all of this is, it really depends on where we are starting from, right? There's this really initial location issue that tells us how we have to move along, and not all countries are the same. So this is really important to realize, and that's what we can learn from working with this theory of the product space. Okay. Now we've just seen this graph, and so I'm not going to comment too much about it, but basically I think it's important to think of these two dimensions of the complexity and the connectedness, where the complexity really, as outsiders, we do not always observe what the letters are, as you said in this phenotypical approach, right? So what the way we can measure complexity is by looking at which products are typically produced together. And then the connectedness, we look at how close in terms of the capabilities are the products and the countries. Okay? So we have these two dimensions, and now we can think of it, in this very simple table that my limited word processing skills I put together, where we say, okay, with very low complexity, low connectedness would be petroleum, for example, and very high complexity, high connectedness would be petrochemicals. Or in this much more beautiful graph that we saw from Hausman, right in the bottom left corner, we have the oil, and in the top right corner, we have the petrochemicals. right? So it really helps us put a map together and identify areas, industries that we can diversify into, right? That was this idea of the product space or the product gap. Now, Professor Hausman is very humble. He did not talk to us about another part of research that he did and that he published, for example, in an interesting article in 21 about the mind gap, right? And so there, it's all about knowledge, it's about education, and the fact that even though many countries increase education, increase the skill set of the population, not in all countries does this translate into tangible results in terms of GDP growth, in terms of, for example, patents or know-how. And so the easiest way to think about know-how is this way of how to answer questions. And a simple way to measure would be by patents, by scientific publications, or by a global index of innovation. And what we see, what kind of the inference that Professor Hausman makes from that branch of his research is that he says, well, because we have this overall increase in education, we do not have a corresponding increase in productivity, in technology. So there is a disconnect between the two. And there's obviously a need for synergy between the businesses, the entrepreneurs who implement the technology, and the country that provides the infrastructure for the education. Okay, so what I would like to do in a minute or two is I would like to show you some numbers, some data that I threw together very, very amateurly and briefly. The time period is roughly 2000 to 2020, not always because I'm assembling data from very different databases. I picked just a handful of countries because I had to manually get all the data. I don't have my PhD student doing this for me in this afternoon. So I just looked at some countries that might be relevant. I apologize, Venezuela was not available for most of it, Professor Hausman, but I took Chile. We have some Chilean members in the audience. China, Egypt, Saudi Arabia is only one data point, unfortunately. But we have Singapore, we have South Korea, Turkey. Okay, so the first one I want to look at is simply patents, as it's come up a lot, and GDP in purchasing power parity. And we see there's a very clear relationship. Okay, so more patents, and this is new patents. This is the change in the number of patents registered in the country over a year versus the GDP. So two flows scattered against each other. We clearly see countries that have more patents are also countries that have higher GDP. Now, and the source is always at the bottom. So this is based on data published through the Global Innovation Index. So when we think of, I invite you, what would keep an economy, what would keep us from using the knowledge that we have, from using the education? Okay, what keeps us back? And I'm at NYU in Abu Dhabi in a very interdisciplinary environment. So, I've learned about culture. And so one of the things that came to my mind was culture. But then I'm also an economist. And so I thought, okay, infrastructure, rule of law might be. So the first one that I would like to look at with you is if we just say, okay, entrepreneurship, business freedom. So there's a survey that is done by Heritage Foundation called the Economic Freedom Index. And one of the dimensions in that is the business freedom. So how does new patents correlate with business freedom? Now, I'm not sure whether this is the outcome that you would have expected. Right? So what we see is there's clearly some kind of nonlinear relationship here. For low amounts of business freedom, higher business freedom correlates with higher patents. Once we go beyond a certain point, more business freedom seems to decline, have a negative correlation with patents. As I said, I only received the presentation sometime around noon today. I couldn't do a very deep analysis, but this is food for thought. I mean, this is a comment. It's inviting a discussion. It's something to help us get the discussion going and maybe think about it, maybe do another. So this is the one that I thought about infrastructure. And I live in a country in the United Arab Emirates that really prides itself of being number one in many dimensions. And business startups is one of them. So here, is an invitation to everybody. Okay, let's study a little more carefully business environment, relation to entrepreneurship, relation to patents. Okay, now, second point I wanted to make, culture. I have a question for you. If the one thing I'm going to look at, I want to look at how easy is it to fail. Unfortunately, I couldn't get data for that, right? In which culture is it allowable to fail? Which culture is really angry? Which really punishes failure? I couldn't get that data. But what I could get was obedience. So there's a survey that is called the World Value Survey. And one of the dimensions that they study is, as a child, for a child, how important is it that the child is obedient? Okay? So children should be encouraged to learn obedience at home. That is the precise text of the question. And here we're correlating that with new patterns. Now, I'm not sure if you would have expected that, but it seems to encourage kids not to obey, kids to have their own mind, kids to go out and explore, to be wild. Again, it's only 10 or 11 countries selected on the nationalities of the participants I met this morning. It is only a few years. It's only a correlation, but it's food for thought. So we have a dimension on infrastructure. We have a dimension on culture that could help understand how we translate the capabilities that are there into actual transformation, into actual pickup of new technology, of new products. Okay. Now, there's, I didn't realize. So the bar up there, the Zoom bar, it is covering the title of the slide, which most of the time didn't matter. Now here it does matter because the title has the question, which is, what's the role of the government in this? Right? So what role does the government play? Because we said, okay, there's this potential lack of synergy between businesses and governments. What should governments do? Should they plan the market, right? Some regions in the world, some economies have a very strong focus on planning. Should they completely direct the market? Should they just simply regulate? Should they completely stay out? I think it's an important dimension that we need to think about and that we need to discuss. And as I said, there's also the role of institution and the role of culture. I think I've used enough of your time. I thank you very much for attending. I'm looking forward to the comments by my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Hefka. And now we move to Professor Hamid Tijani Ali, who is the Dean of School of Administration and Development Economics at Doha Institute for Graduate Studies.
Thank you so much. Sometimes if you are unlucky, you'll be the last person to make a comment. So I will try to make it quite briefer. It's true that this theory of economic complexity offer a framework for the GCC countries to diversify their economies by expanding into related industries such as petrochemicals and energy-related materials. This is not only a sign that with a global energy transition, but also enhancing their economies and their economies' resilience and sustainability in the face of changing energy markets. And certainly, while the theory of economic complexity offers an opportunity for the diversification and integration to the GCC oil industry into the global transition, there are several constraints. And I'm talking about the economic constraints. Those are, and some others are the policy constraints. One of the constraints is, these are the resources dependence risk. In other words, the GCC region has historically been heavily reliant on the oil revenues. Shifting its resources and attention towards the diversification effort can be challenging, and it has an implication in the short run and even sometimes in the long run in terms of the government revenues and government earnings. And it could create economic instability. That's one of the challenges. The other challenge is the market volatilities, because the petrochemical industry, like any other industry, also can be subject to the market prices. And that volatility will be carried on, even if though we are trying to avoid the volatility, but it is there because it is one of its components. And this is also exposure, commodity prices fluctuation could be very, make it a little bit of a challenge. In terms of the capabilities and in terms of the letters, this is basically about the technical and technological changes. And if we look at the expansion of the new industries, such as the renewable energy materials, may require significant technical and technological expertise. There could be a steep learning curve, and this needs a substantial investment in the education, in research, and our universities also need to be changed. Even our schools that will motivate people and create creativity and ingenuity in our people, even from their childhood. The other also challenge that is I would pay attention to is the competitiveness of the global market. Because the global petrochemical renewable energy industry are highly competitive. GCC countries will face a competition from the established player. And this was the early discussion about we need to have a place in the table for negotiation for the rules. Because if the rules has written, those people are going to be having one step ahead. And so that could be very challenging because you are going to compete to get a market share in that is very competitive environment. The other things also danger of diversification. Sometimes we are afraid that sometimes we are over-investing on it. And that could trigger a bubble. And we don't want to see the experience of the bubbles and seeing the dot-coms in America, the housing market bubbles that has happened. But the investment in the infrastructure that we're investing on it, this new industry needs heavy investment on the infrastructure, and it can be very costly, time-consuming, and also there's the risk of overextending our resources in the infrastructure development without guaranteeing a return on those investments. On the labor force transition also, we need to see that some sort of a successful diversification strategy may require retraining and also transitioning the labor force from the oil-related industry to new sectors. Not necessarily we try to value add it in a sense, just in a sense of developing the capability of the product. Also, this transition also could be quite challenging. And the last one is about the technological obsolescences, because rapid advancement in the renewable energy technologies means that the product can become very obsolete quickly. And so the investment in the wrong technologies or industry could lead to clearly stranding our assets and our resources. So in conclusion, while the diversification and integration into the global energy transition offer an opportunity for the GCC regions, it is important to carefully manage the associated risk and challenges. A well-thought out strategy, long-term planning, and focused sustainability are essential for the successful economic transformation. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Hamid. And now we will go to the floor and take some questions. And I hope, because of the time constraints, we focus on the questions as much as possible, please. Yes, we need the microphone. Excuse me. There.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the presenters. So a quick question from me. I think one of the things I noticed, and I think Professor Hausman used the example of making chocolate in Switzerland. So Switzerland produces chocolate, Belgium also produces chocolate, but other European countries don't. But they seem to have all the same endowments, the same know-how, the same kind of technology capabilities, but they're not known for producing chocolate. So why is that, right? And similarly, if you look at where soccer balls are produced, right? 80% of the world's soccer balls come from Pakistan, from one particular area of Pakistan. Why is that? Why can Bangladesh not produce soccer balls, right? They seem to have the same culture, same endowments, et cetera, but they don't, right? So why is that? And I think Dr. Christian, you kind of mentioned as a throwaway right at the end about culture and institutions. I think that's really where a lot of the discussion should be, right? But also the role of government, right? So the GCC, often we look at the GCC as very, very similar, but they're not. They're heading in different directions despite having similar endowments, right? I think Saudi Arabia is a very good example of this. We are heading in a certain direction because of Vision 2030, because of the role of the government, because of all the social transformation that's happened here. And I think looking into those things, we can understand that we are not functions or determinants of the endowments that we have. And the way we can move into adjacencies is not just because they're close by, but because of all of the things that you mentioned right at the end, the culture, the institutions, the role of government, the role of the private sector.
Thank you. Would you say your name, please?
My name is Ismail Radwan. I'm the Senior Director for Economics at the Public Investment Fund.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Omar Labedli from Dirasat. I have a question for Christian, or a remark for Christian. You put in the graph, you put the, I think it was obedience you picked up from the World Value Survey. So I once was investigating the causes of low innovation in Bahrain, and I interviewed 20 Bahrainis who had condition for being an interviewee was that you had worked in an OECD country for at least a year and worked in Bahrain for at least a year. And so that you had exposure to both types of organization. And one of the factors that was identified from the interviews as being accounting for low innovation levels in Bahrain was lack of critical thinking skills, which is related to what you're talking about, but I think it's a bit more precise. The mechanism being that innovation is about developing new solutions to problems, to identifying problems, developing new solutions to them. People who lack critical thinking skills and who've been educated in GCC education systems tend to be taught to accept facts and to avoid questioning history, things which are commonly discussed and criticized in Western education systems. And so what you end up with is, in general, a workforce that is incapable of questioning authority within the organization and exploring how to produce things in a better way, how to arrange organized production in a different way, because their mindset is very much take what management says, accept it as truth, and execute. So I think it's not so much obedience as it is critical thinking skills. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hello. Yes. Question for Dr. Hausman.
Would you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Nader Kabani. I'm the Director of Research of the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. Well, thank you all very much for a very rich discussion, and for Dr. Hausman, Professor Hausman, a very conceptually rich understanding of capabilities and how those are linked to growth. My question is about the context of countries like Saudi Arabia or Gulf countries that rely on a natural resource like oil. Capabilities are, of course, very important, but what happens also is that the cost of production is low enough that there's not let's say, there's two factors here. First of all, you don't have as much global competition for those. So the capabilities are there, but not necessarily honed as strongly in a globally competitive environment because they do have a cost advantage. The second is that you have enough revenue from that you can possibly choose where you want to diversify. So you can, a lot of the capabilities here are importing resources, use of migrant workers. And so there is some, it seems to me, some flexibility or some ability to be more strategic in terms of culture and institutions and other factors may play a bigger role in the context of countries with such large rents. And I just want to hear your reflections on that. I mean, there's an exceptional situation in countries that have significant resource rents to make some additional choices. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have two more questions because of the time constraints, so it's okay. Hello? Would you bring the microphone here, please? Here, excuse me.
Okay, thank you. I am Bedri Taş from Sultan Qaboos University. I would like to ask a question to Dr. Hausman and also Dr. Christian. To Dr. Hausman, my humble experience with network analysis is it is very hard to come up with economic meaning, like economic interpretation with respect to network measures. So especially with respect to connectedness measures. So could you please provide some more information about what it means? Like we have these connectedness between sectors. So basically that's a measure of whether we can move from one node to another node, and that is a more central way. So a little, maybe you have mentioned in the presentation, but could you please provide more economic intuition between what it means that a sector has more centrality, its centrality measure is higher, and how we can have an economic interpretation with respect to this network of different sectors. And this is also related, so Dr. Christian, you have, like, your presentation was excellent. It made me understand the presentation of Dr. Hausman also. But I think as far as I understand, instead of like focusing on these network dynamics, we need to be focusing on more country-specific factors and what are the underlying dynamics. Am I right in that context? Or okay, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. The last question, yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
Would you introduce yourself?
My name is Ahmed Issad. I'm Associate Professor from United Arab Emirates University. I'd like to thank you so much for the very interesting, informative presentation and the knowledge about complexity. Just I have one question about the start of the presentation. You made your classification based on the per capita GDP. So countries in the higher percentile is actually classified as more diversified economies. But actually this is could be the case, that is we have some rich countries that is actually in top quintiles in terms of the GDP, but they actually have less diversified in terms of the productivity and production as well. Also, the countries in this higher percentile could actually have higher GDP per capita because of the higher prices. So it doesn't have to be the case that is those countries who are at the top percentile actually has higher diversification in terms of productivity as well. So please, what's your take on this? Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Hausman, do you have any comment?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for these two very, very thoughtful comments and these very excellent questions. I'm going to be very brief to just summarize some of them. On this last point, the graph that I showed, I must say I find that graph really, really telling. What we've done is we've classified countries not in terms of their GDP per capita, not in terms of their diversification, not in terms of anything, just in terms of how fast they grew since 1980. Okay, fast growers, low growers, okay? And I've shown to you how much they grew, the fast growers, low growers, just in terms of how much they grew, period. In the other graph, what I showed you is what happened to the letters, if you want. What happened to economic complexity of these 5 groups of countries? And it shows that only the top quintile really of growers really made significant progress in terms of catching up with the US. And those are the countries that also made significant progress in accumulating more letters. Not that they started with more letters, that in the dynamics, they accumulated more letters. They increased more their economic complexity index. And that the rankings of the two are related. So it's about the dynamics, not the statics. It's not about income per capita. It's about growth. And it's about the increase in the number of letters that you have. So that's the meaning of that graph. I find it very telling because it cannot be easily dismissed by saying, you know, rich countries have many characteristics. It's not about rich and poor. It's about countries that caught up. They don't necessarily started rich. They caught up a lot in that 40-year period. Let me mention about the relationship between education and know-how that Christian alluded to. I think that the fundamental problem is that education teaches in school something that kind of like what everybody knows. And the important thing in the economy is how different are the things that people know. So it's not, if you want to think of know-how, think of it as if it was light. And light has 2 properties. It has an intensity, high intensity, low intensity, but it has a spectrum. Is how many different colors does the light contain, okay? What I want to say about know-how is that it's a lot in the spectrum, not only in the intensity, okay? It's in the spectrum. In school, you have one teacher that teaches many kids, but one teacher only knows what one person knows. How do you get a society that knows many things? I think that what a society knows, it's known mostly in its firms, in its companies, in its teams, right? I have spent more time at the university than probably most people, 99% of people. I'm 67 years old and I have not left the university still. So I don't know how to make shoes. I don't know how to make chocolate. I don't know how to make anything, right? So I know about my little thing and other people know about different things. The problem that we have is that we need people with work experience. If you look at any company and you ask how many jobs in that company can be done by somebody who came right out of school, very, very few. We need people with work experience, but you can only acquire experience on industries that exist. You cannot acquire experience on industries that don't exist. So you cannot become a watchmaker in a place that doesn't make watches. So that's why know-how is so much related to this transformation, that you need to find ways in which you can get know-how that you don't have. And from that perspective, so I mean, I don't want to disregard culture and other things, and I think those connections are fine. I don't think they help us explain what paths to diversification a country with a certain culture, with a certain set of institutions should choose. Okay, I'm assuming that we don't have a technology to change culture. We don't know how to do that. And that changing institutions is a long process. So I'm assuming I'm taking these things as sort of given, and I'm asking myself the question, what are the easier and more promising paths towards diversification, given culture and given institutions, okay? And I think that one of the really great things about the GCC is that it has a uniquely open labor market. It has a global labor market. So, you know, for example, in the UAE, you have 1 million citizens, 9 million or 10 million total population. So you have a lot of expats. You don't have watchmakers, not a problem. You bring them in. Many countries don't leverage that. And that facilitates transformation in the GCC. It's a very important asset. I very much like Minister Bintouk, Minister of Economy and Planning of the UAE, likes to talk about in the UAE being a brain port. I like the concept of being able to attract talent. I think this is very, very useful and important for transformation. On the question, why is it that Europe only Belgium and Switzerland make chocolate. Why has it not spread further? And why are soccer balls made in Pakistan? I extract sort of like the opposite interpretation. It's not culture, it's know-how. If you want to learn how to make chocolate, bring a Swiss chocolate meister. That the know-how is in his brain. If he comes to your country, he will hire other people who will train other people. Other people know how to make chocolate, and that is how the chocolate know-how spreads. We've done a lot of work on Albania. Albania has a very rich diaspora. When communism collapsed, people left. Then some of them came back, and we were able to trace back sort of how did know-how get into Albania? Well, people left Albania, had work experiences outside of Albania. When they decided to come back, they brought back the things that they learned while working abroad, not while studying abroad, while working abroad. So, for example, the gastronomic scene in Tirana these days is fantastic. All of these people learned how to cook in European restaurants and came back. So that's how I'm thinking that know-how moves from place to place. It moves in people's brains. And we have done a lot of work in exploring what are the channels through which it moves. So migration, diasporas, return migration, even business travel. We have a paper showing that business travel is important for the evolution of know-how. On the question of the economic interpretation of connectedness, in my mind, it's relatively straightforward. And it has a very clear, empirical, testable implication, and we have tested it. If you ask yourself if a product is very close to other products, the probability that a country that starts with know-how in that product, starts with productive capabilities in that product, the probability that it can diffuse into other things. And so this centrality or this connectedness as we measure is very much related to future diversification opportunities, and the data is consistent with that. Finally, I think that I want to say that culture is in some sense endogenous. Culture evolves, and it evolves through production. When you look at the productive capability, what a country produces, it tells you in some sense indirectly, implicitly, that it has the institutions to produce those things, and it doesn't have the institutions to produce other things. That it has the culture to produce those things, and it doesn't have probably the culture to produce other things. But culture and institutions are going to evolve in the sense that every industry is going to require a certain set of public goods, a certain set of rules. You know, if you develop a car, if you want to develop the car industry, well, you know, there's going to be a private market for cars. There is no private market for roads, for traffic signs, for traffic lights, for traffic rules, for traffic cops. All the institutionality around cars is going to evolve with cars. So the process of diversification is also going to involve a process of institutional transformation. And, you know, the culture of a society that is mostly rural is going to be one. When the society gets it into manufacturing, into chemicals, into other things, the culture of that society is going to change. And I'm sure that the culture of the societies in the GCC is evolving as the societies are becoming more prosperous, as they are becoming more educated, as they get into other industrial activities, that the culture is going to reflect those elements. Thank you guys very much for this opportunity to interact with you. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and thanks for having included me in this interaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hasman. And now we move to Professor Hetke.
I'm going to have to leave because it's past my time. So I say goodbye to you. Goodbye to you. Sorry.
Goodbye. Right. So I'm responding to the questions, and I guess I still respond to what Professor Hausman said. I assume this is recorded, so he has the chance to look at it later on, I guess. There was one question on, thanks a lot for the comment. I'd be very curious to learn more about it, and maybe we can chat about it. You can send it to me. Yeah, I have my office amongst sociologists, and I think that, even for the hardcore macro labor guy, that at some point there's some osmosis and I take these things. Why I showed the obedience, not the critical thinking. I think I really wanted this for us to get the discussion started. Now, this was food for thought and not a definite answer. It was just to say, okay, I agree with Professor Hausman that this product matrix and product map, it's really important. It tells us where we could go. But, during COVID, I put on 25 kilos. I'm sitting, you don't see it, and I have a good tailor, so it's reasonably well hidden. But, my wife and my mother, they both have their own approaches of telling me that I really need to lose weight, and I agree with them. And actually, I have the technology to lose weight. I can go running, I can reduce my food, but I still don't do it. Right? And then my mother yells at me, and my mother punishes me, and my wife tries to motivate me. And so there are different approaches. Some of them are successful, others are not. Even though exactly where we want to go. And I think this is what I wanted to raise, right? To say, hey, we use the product matrix, the product map, to know where we would like a country to go, which industries are good industries to go to. But at least in the way that I read economic history, usually it does not work that there is a central command that says, this is what must be done. At the end of the day, it is the households, the consumers, the workers, the firms that do the action. In context, of course, in an environment that is set by the government. And it is the institutions, it is the culture that incentivizes and brings people to do these things. And so that was how I thought that is complementary for the culture and from the institutions and the government to the role of the product matrix, right? So this is just to put in context the comments and the reply of Professor Hausman. And I do agree with him on the point of the very special privileged role, if you want, of the GCC, in the sense that you really can bring the people with the experience if they're currently not here, right? So in the sense, there is no chicken and egg problem here, because you can just bring the chicken and get the industry started and then take it from there. But I think, especially also in this situation, again, what is important is to understand the mindset of the people who, in the long run, sustainably have to do the work. That differs, that's very different in Saudi Arabia from UAE. And that has to be taken into account, and the culture and the institutions have to matter too. So I hope I've answered everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't have much to comment, but the only thing that was about why Belgium is producing chocolate. And I'm just thinking about Belgium is a very small country, so it has probably one or two letters. So one of the letters is they know how to do the chocolate. The other thing is about the institutions. I think the institution does matter. And the head start, because this country, they have a patent, they're able to penetrate the market, and it becomes a monopolistic competition. They're able to differentiate the product. Even if you produce a chocolate, UAE might let them produce a chocolate, but people still prefer Swiss chocolate. So that's because of the patent, because of the product differentiation that they created, and it's become a monopolistic competition. For that reason, they can continue dominating the market. Thank you.
Thank you. In your names, I like to thank our distinguished speakers and thank you for your participation. And we'll end our session today, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Dinner? Thank you very much. There's also dinner being served outside, so we look forward to seeing you there.